Get rid of what you carry, liar. I am not ruining my family's political seat for a mistake! How could you do this to me?
I didn't mean for this.
Lies! This is all your fault!
Please, just listen.
Don't get rid of it. I will be the father.
Get rid of what you carry, Malaya. I am not ruining my family's political seat for a mistake. Mateo's voice rang through the elite lounge like a whip crack. Malaya Bentley stood frozen, her hands instinctively protecting her rounded belly. But from the shadows of the high-rise, a low, steady command cut through the insults. Don't get rid of it. I will be the father. The air in the high-rise lounge was thin and freezing, heavy with the scent of expensive lilies and the metallic promise of an approaching storm. Beyond the towering glass windows, the city blurred into streaks of gold and gray, but inside the room, everything stood painfully still. Malaya Bentley stood at the center of it all, in an elegant red dress that suddenly felt too bright, too exposing, one trembling hand cradling the curve of her stomach. Across from her, Mateo Walker looked immaculate in his navy suit, every inch the rising political star, except for the rage twisting his face. "Get rid of it!" he snapped, his voice slicing through the soft piano music and echoing against glass and marble. Conversations died. Donors turned away but did not leave. No one intervened. "It's a career killer," he continued, stepping closer, lowering his voice only enough to make it more vicious. "Do you have any idea what this would do to my polling numbers? To my family's seat? Not our future, not our child, my seat." Malia swallowed the burn in her throat. She would not cry. "You said you wanted this," she whispered. "That was before I thought," he shot back. "I won't throw away everything I've built for a mistake." The word mistake landed like a slap. He pointed at her stomach as if it were an accusation. "End it, quietly. I'll handle the rest." The humiliation was deliberate, public, calculated. The golden ambient lighting shifted as if the room itself sensed the change before anyone else did. A chair scraped softly. Footsteps followed. Measured, unhurried, controlled, every whisper dissolved. Baek Hyun-jun stepped out of the shadows in a tailored black suit that seemed to absorb the light around him. A dark scorpion tattoo coiled up his neck and disappeared beneath his collar, a silent warning no one in the city dared ignore. Mateo froze the moment he recognized him. Hyun-jun did not look at the politician. His gaze settled entirely on Malia, on the tension in her shoulders, on the protective way her hand shielded the life inside her. "Don't," he said quietly. And the single word carried more authority than Mateo's shouting ever had. He stepped forward, calm and composed, as though finalizing a business acquisition rather than interrupting a scandal. "I will be the father." The room stopped breathing. Mateo's face drained to gray. "You can't be serious." Hyun-jun's eyes shifted to him at last, steady and unreadable. "In this city," he replied evenly, "I am always serious." There was no romance in his tone, no softness in his expression. What he offered was not love. It was protection, power, inevitability. "The car is outside," he told Malia, his voice lowering just enough for her. "You don't have to stay here." Thunder cracked against the windows as if sealing the moment. Malia looked at Mateo one final time and saw not the man she loved, but the ambition that had devoured him. Then she turned away without another word and walked toward the man with ink on his throat and an empire in his hands, realizing that a contract with a stranger felt infinitely safer than a promise from a coward. Behind her, as the storm broke over the city, Mateo Walker understood too late that he had just lost everything. The iron gates of the Han estate groaned like ancient guards as the heavy SUV pulled inside. Malia stared out the window at the fortress of limestone and glass, feeling a mix of awe and fear. Inside, the house was filled with expensive dark wood and soft golden lighting, but it felt lonely and quiet. Armed guards stood in the corners like statues, their eyes watching every move she made. Hyunjun led her to the base of a massive winding staircase and told her the staff had been instructed to care for her. He explained that she could eat what she wanted and go where she wanted as long as she stayed within the gates for her own safety. Malia looked at her sequined gown, realizing she had traded a political cage for a golden sanctuary. The luxury of the estate was a sharp contrast to the emotional storm she had just escaped. She felt like a guest in a beautiful prison, guarded by a man she barely knew but already trusted. The next morning, the silence in the dining room was heavy as Malaya sat across from Hyunjun. He was dressed in a crisp black shirt, his sleeves rolled up to show tattoos of dragons and mountains. He did not look up from his tablet when he told her a new doctor would arrive at 10 o'clock. Malia argued that she already had a doctor, but Hyunjun's gaze turned sharp. Like he revealed a dark secret. Her old doctor was on Mateo's payroll. He showed her a paper trail proving that Mateo had already paid for a secret appointment to end her pregnancy without her knowing. The blood drained from Malia's face as the weight of the betrayal hit her. Mateo hadn't just yelled at her, he had planned to take her choice away in the dark. Hyunjun didn't want her thanks, he was simply executing a plan to keep her safe. She realized then that the prince was a monster, and the monster was the only one acting with honor. Late that night, a heavy storm lashed against the windows of the estate. Malaya lay in her large bed, listening to the thunder and the rhythmic ticking of the clock. She felt the baby move for the first time, a small poke that brought tears to her eyes. Outside her door, the hallway was dim, smelling of cedarwood and rain. Hyunjun stood in the shadows, his back against the wall as he kept a silent watch. He did not go to his own room to sleep. He remained a steady anchor in the dark. He had made a silent vow to protect the life he had claimed, even if it cost him his standing with the Mafia elders. Through the crack in the door, Malaya saw his silhouette, the light catching the dark lines of the scorpion on his neck. He was a man built out of scars and secrets, yet he stayed there all night, guarding her sleep. For the first time in years, Malia felt like she didn't have to be the shield for everyone else. The next morning, the large television in the library flickered to life, showing Mateo Walker looking very sad for the cameras. He wore a neat suit and pretended to wipe away a tear while he spoke to a news reporter. Mateo lied to the whole world, claiming that Malia had been kidnapped and was being held hostage by a dangerous criminal. He called himself a worried boyfriend who just wanted to save the woman he loved from a monster. Malia watched the screen in shock as her phone began to buzz with angry messages from people she once called friends. They believed Mateo's fake story and called her a traitor for being with the Han family. Mateo was using his power to turn everyone against her so he could look like a hero again. He didn't care that he was destroying her name just to save his own career. The smear campaign was a cruel trap designed to make her feel alone and afraid. Later that evening, Malia found Hyunjun standing by the large windows in the sunroom, looking out at the city lights. The silence between them was usually cold, but today felt different. Suddenly, Malia felt a sharp and clear poke from inside her womb. She gasped and grabbed her stomach, which made Hyunjun turn around with a look of worry on his face. He asked if he should call the doctor, but Malia just shook her head and smiled. She reached out and took his large, tattooed hand, pulling it toward her belly. Hyunjun froze, his body going stiff as his palm pressed against the soft fabric of her dress. Then, the baby kicked right against his hand. A look of pure wonder broke across his face, and for a small moment, his scary mask disappeared. He stayed there on his knees, staring at her with soft eyes. In that moment, the contract was gone. And they were just two people sharing a miracle. Hyunjun stood up and led Malia down the long hallway to a room that had stayed locked for days. When he opened the door, Malia's eyes widened in surprise. He had turned a plain guest room into a beautiful and safe nursery. The walls were painted a soft color, and the furniture was made of the best wood. However, this was not just a normal baby room. It was built like a fortress. The windows were made of glass that could not break, and there were hidden cameras to watch over the child. Hyunjun explained that inside these walls, no one could ever touch her or the baby. He had spent thousands of dollars to make sure they were protected from Mateo's reach. Malia walked around the room, touching the soft blankets and the sturdy crib. She realized that while Mateo wanted to erase the baby, Hyunjun was already building a world for it. It was a golden sanctuary built out of fierce loyalty and care. A few days later, a large delivery truck arrived at the heavy iron gates of the estate. The guards checked the package carefully before bringing it inside to the living room. It was a beautifully wrapped gift with a card that said it was from Mateo. Inside, Malia found an expensive silver rattle, but when she picked it up, a small hidden speaker began to play a recording. It was Mateo's voice, but he wasn't crying like he did on television. He laughed and mocked Malia, calling her a fool for thinking a mafia boss would ever truly care for her. He told her she was just a toy for Hyunjun and that he would eventually get rid of her just like he did. The cruel words filled the quiet room, making Malia's heart feel heavy with sadness. It was a poisoned gift meant to break her spirit and make her doubt her safety. Mateo wanted her to know that he was still watching her every move. Hyunjun did not say a word as he listened to the recording, but his eyes turned as dark as coal. He put on his black suit jacket and walked out to his car with his men following closely behind. He drove straight to the middle of the city and walked right into Mateo's busy campaign headquarters. The staff froze in fear as the tall man with the scorpion tattoo marched past them without stopping. He found Mateo sitting at his desk, looking very proud of himself. Hyunjun did not pull a gun or use any violence. He simply leaned over the desk and stared into Mateo's eyes with a cold, terrifying intensity. He told Mateo that every move he made was being watched and that the next gift he sent would be his last. Mateo's face turned pale, and his hands began to shake as he realized he was not playing a game anymore. Hyunjun left as quickly as he arrived, leaving a heavy silence behind him. The atmosphere inside the grand meeting room was thick with the scent of old cigars and heavy tension. Hyunjun's uncle, Elias, sat at the head of the long table, leaning on a silver-topped cane. He looked at his nephew with cold, narrowed eyes while the other mafia elders whispered in the shadows. Elias slammed his hand down, demanding that Hyunjun get rid of the outsider immediately. He argued that Malaya was a weakness who would bring the police to their front door and ruin their family legacy. The elders believed that protecting a pregnant woman from a political scandal was a waste of their power. They told Hyunjun that he was becoming soft and that a leader who followed his heart instead of the rules was dangerous. Hyunjun stood his ground, his jaw tight and his hands clenched into fists. He refused to throw her out, making it clear that Malaya and the baby were now under his personal protection, no matter what the council decided. Hyunjun organized a formal dinner party to introduce Malia to the powerful mafia families, but the room felt like a battlefield. The wives of the other leaders sat in their silk dresses, whispering behind their hands and giving Malia cold looks. They saw her as a common girl who did not belong in their secret world. Malia felt their judgment, but she did not let her head hang low. Instead, she used her skills as a community advocate to change the mood of the room. She spoke with grace and strength, sharing her passion for helping people and building a better future for children. Slowly, the cold whispers stopped as the women began to listen to her words. She showed them that she was not a victim or a burden, but a woman of high character. By the end of the night, the laughter in the room sounded real, and Malia realized she had won her first major battle for respect. Late one night, a sudden sharp pain caused Malia to cry out in the silence of her bedroom. Within seconds, Hyunjun was at her side, his face pale with a fear she had never seen before. He did not act like a cold boss. He acted like a man who was terrified of losing the only thing that mattered to him. He scooped her up in his arms and carried her down the stairs while shouting for the medical staff to move faster. As the nurse checked on Malaya and the baby, Hyunjun paced back and forth in the hallway, his hands shaking. He realized in that quiet, scary moment that his feelings for her were no longer just about a contract or a debt. He couldn't imagine his life or the estate without her presence. When the nurse finally said that Malia was safe and just needed rest, Hyunjun let out a long breath, finally understanding that he was completely in love with her. While Malia was resting the next day, she found an old, dusty wooden box hidden at the back of a shelf in the library. Inside were yellowed photographs of a young boy with sad eyes standing alone in a large, empty house. She realized the boy was Hyunjun. As she looked through the items, she found a letter explaining that Hyunjun had also been a rejected child, cast aside by his parents because he didn't fit their perfect image. He had grown up in the shadows of the Han family, fighting for every bit of respect he owned. This secret history explained why he was so determined to protect her and her unborn baby. He knew exactly how it felt to be told you were a mistake or a liability. When Hyunjun entered the room and saw the box, he didn't get angry. He sat down beside her and quietly shared the pain of his past, creating a bond between them that was stronger than any tattoo. To prove to the world that they were not afraid of Mateo's lies, Hyunjun decided it was time for a public walk. He drove Malia back to the community center where she used to work, but he didn't stay in the armored car. He stepped out and walked right beside her, his tall frame acting as a shield against the cameras. The neighborhood people stared in surprise to see the feared mafia boss helping a pregnant woman into the building with such care. They stood together in the sunlight, showing everyone that they were not hiding in the dark. Mateo's smear campaign had claimed she was a prisoner, but her smile told a different story. As they walked through the front doors, the staff and children cheered for her return. Hyunjun watched Malia work with a look of pride in his eyes. He realized that by standing in the light with her, he was finally starting to wash away the shadows of his own dangerous life. The afternoon sun was bright as Malia walked out of the community center, feeling happy about her work. Suddenly, a sharp crack sounded through the air like a popping balloon. Before Malia could even blink, Hyunjun lunged toward her, his face filled with a fierce determination. He wrapped his strong arms around her and twisted his body to act as a human shield. A second shot rang out, and Malia felt Hyunjun flinch as a bullet grazed his shoulder. They crashed to the sidewalk behind the safety of the armored SUV while his guards moved into action. Malia's heart hammered against her ribs as she looked at the blood staining Hyunjun's black suit jacket. He didn't groan or complain about the pain. He only cared if she and the baby were safe. The neighborhood went from peaceful to terrifying in a single second. Malia realized then that Mateo was truly desperate enough to try and kill her just to hide his own dark secrets. Back at the estate, the air was thick with the smell of antiseptic and the sound of heavy rain. Hyunjun sat on the edge of a chair in the library, refusing to go to a hospital where he might be seen. Malia took the medical kit and carefully began to clean the wound on his shoulder. Her hands trembled at first, but she focused on the man who had just saved her life. As she wrapped the white bandages around his skin, the silence in the room changed from awkward to very intimate. They were so close that she could feel the heat radiating from his body and see the tiny details of the tattoos on his neck. Hyunjun watched her with a soft, steady gaze that made her breath catch in her throat. The fear from the shooting melted away, replaced by a deep connection that didn't need any words. In that quiet moment, they were no longer just a protector and a guest. The peace did not last long because a man in a gray suit arrived at the gates the next morning. He handed over legal papers that made Malia's blood run cold. Mateo Walker was suing for full custody of the unborn baby, claiming that Malia was an unfit mother because she lived with a criminal. It was a clever legal trap designed to ruin her life. Mateo did not actually want to be a father. He just wanted to use the law to force Malia away from Hyunjun's protection. If he won the court case, he could control where she lived and who she talked to. He was using his political power and his family money to play a dirty game with a child's future. Malia sat at the dining table, staring at the documents with tears in her eyes. She felt like Mateo was trying to steal the only thing she had left. Hyunjun took the papers and promised that no judge would ever take her child. Hyunjun insisted on a secret checkup at a private clinic to make sure the baby was still healthy after the stress. However, Mateo had spies everywhere, even inside the hospital. While Malia was waiting for her results, a nurse who looked very nervous tried to swap her medical folder for a different one. Hyunjun's sharp eyes caught the movement immediately. He grabbed the nurse's wrist before she could finish the switch. Inside the fake folder were false reports claiming the baby had a serious heart problem that would require Malaya to give up her rights for special care. It was another cruel trick by Mateo to make Malaya feel weak and helpless. He wanted to use fake medical news to scare her into coming back to him. Hyunjun's face turned into a mask of pure ice as he realized how deep the corruption went. He realized that even the places meant for healing were no longer safe from Mateo's reach. The constant attacks finally pushed Hyunjun past his limit. He found out that one of Mateo's top campaign workers was the person who helped plan the hospital sabotage. Hyunjun cornered the man in a dark parking garage late at night. For the first time, the cold and calm boss was replaced by a man filled with a terrifying rage. He grabbed the associate by the collar and slammed him against a concrete pillar, his eyes glowing with a lethal light. Hyunjun looked like he was ready to end the man's life right there to protect Malaya from any more pain. His hands were tight around the man's throat, and the air was filled with a dangerous tension. Just as he was about to strike a final blow, he thought of Malia's face and the promise he made to be a better man. He let go, leaving the man shaking on the ground, but he had reached his breaking point. The war was no longer about politics. The grand ballroom was filled with bright lights and the sound of nervous whispering. Malia Bentley stepped into the room, looking like a queen in a flowing dress that showed her pregnancy with pride. She was no longer the scared girl who had been dumped weeks ago. Beside her, Hyunjun walked with a steady and commanding presence, his dark suit hiding the bandage on his shoulder. Mateo Walker stood across the room, his face turning pale as he saw the woman he tried to destroy looking more powerful than ever. The wealthy guests watched in shock as the mafia boss kept a protective hand near Malaya's waist, acting as her shield against their judgment. Mateo tried to approach them with a fake smile, but the cold intensity in Hyunjun's eyes stopped him in his tracks. Malia walked right past her ex-boyfriend without saying a word, proving that she was no longer a liability. She was finally the prize. And everyone in the room knew it. While exploring a restricted area of the Han estate the next morning, Malia found a hidden safe in Hyunjun's private office. Inside was an old police report that made her heart stop. 10 years ago, a car accident had taken her father's life, but the records showed that Hyunjun's own father was the one behind the wheel. The blood drained from her face as she realized the truth. Hyunjun hadn't just stepped in to save her at the gala by chance. He had been watching over her for a decade because of a deep debt of blood. The protection, the expensive nursery, and the safety were all built on a foundation of guilt. She felt a sharp sting of betrayal as she looked at the photos of her father kept in a folder. Hyunjun entered the room and saw her holding the papers. His silent face told her everything she needed to know. He was protecting her to fix his family's dark past. Malia felt a cold wave of anger wash over her as she stared at Hyunjun. She didn't feel like a partner anymore. She felt like another project he was trying to fix to make himself feel better. "Was any of this real?" she shouted, her voice shaking with emotion. She realized that every kind gesture might have just been a way for him to pay back a debt she never knew about. Without waiting for his answer, she began to pack her bags, determined to leave the limestone fortress forever. Hyunjun stood by the door, his eyes filled with a deep sadness, but he did not try to stop her by force. He knew he had kept a terrible secret from her. Malia walked past the guards at the front gate, her heart breaking into pieces. Yet she wanted to be loved for who she was, not because of a tragedy from 10 years ago. She was tired of men using her for their own selfish reasons. A massive summer storm hit the city that night, bringing heavy rain and howling winds. Malia had taken shelter in a small apartment, but she didn't know that Mateo was tracking her every move. Suddenly, the lights flickered and died, leaving the entire neighborhood in a pitch-black darkness. Mateo had used the distraction of the storm to cut the power and breach the security that Hyunjun had secretly kept on her. Without the electronic locks and cameras working, Malia was completely vulnerable. She heard the sound of a window breaking in the kitchen and the heavy footsteps of men entering the home. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she realized she had made a terrible mistake by leaving the estate. She tried to hide in the darkness, but the shadows seemed to be closing in. Mateo was no longer playing a legal game. He was using the chaos of the storm to take her back by force. Malia scrambled into the small room she had started as a nursery, but Mateo was already there, waiting in the shadows. He looked manic and desperate, his expensive suit soaked from the rain. He blocked the only exit, holding a heavy object in his hand like a weapon. "I have a plan to save my career, Malaya," he hissed, his voice sounding truly evil. He revealed that he wanted to be seen as a widowed father, a tragic hero who lost his wife but saved his child. He didn't want a family. He wanted a sad story that would win him the public sympathy and the Senate seat. Malia felt a cold shiver run down her spine as she realized he intended to get rid of her for good. Just as Mateo moved toward her, a low growl sounded from the hallway. The door burst open, and the dark silhouette of the scorpion appeared in the moonlight. The real war for Malia's life had finally begun. The room shook as the door crashed open, and Hyunjun stepped inside like a storm. His eyes were filled with a dark, lethal heat as he looked at Mateo, who was still holding the heavy trophy. Mateo's hands trembled as he realized his plan was falling apart in the dark. Hyunjun did not move to strike him right away. Instead, he stood beside Malaya, his presence acting like a solid wall of granite. He looked at her and saw the fire in her eyes, realizing she was no longer the girl who needed to be shielded. Hyunjun stepped back just a few inches, giving her the space to stand on her own 2 feet. He chose to let Malia finish the fight because he knew she needed to take back her own power. Mateo lunged forward in a desperate panic, but Malia did not flinch. She stood her ground as a true partner, ready to face the coward who had tried to erase her life. As Mateo shouted more threats, Malia slowly pulled her phone from the pocket of her dress. She hit a button, and the quiet room was suddenly filled with the sound of Mateo's own voice. The recording played back every cruel word he had just said. It captured his plan to become a widowed father, and his confession that he never cared about the baby at all. Mateo's face turned from a manic red to a sickly, ghostly white. He realized that while he was busy acting like a villain, Malaya was busy being a hero. She had used her advocacy skills to trap him in his own web of lies. Hyunjun watched her with a look of pure pride, knowing that she had won the war without needing a single weapon. The recording was the final blow to Mateo's perfect image. He was no longer a rising political star. He was just a criminal caught in a high-definition lie. The sound of police sirens began to wail in the distance, getting louder as they rushed toward the building. Hyunjun's men had already called the authorities and shared the live recording with every news station in the city. When the police burst through the door, they found Mateo shaking on the floor, his career and his dignity completely gone. Outside, the supporters who had once cheered for the prince began to turn on him instantly. The news spread like wildfire, showing the world the monster behind the polished suit. Mateo was led away in handcuffs while the cameras captured his fall from grace. He looked small and pathetic as he was pushed into the back of a police car. Malia stood on the balcony with Hyunjun, watching the chaos unfold below. The legal trap had been broken, and the prince had finally lost his crown. For the first time in years, the city felt like a place of actual justice. A few weeks later, the cold limestone fortress of the city was replaced by the warm sun of Jeju Island. Malia and Hyunjun sat on a private plane, watching the city lights disappear behind the clouds. They were leaving the shadows of the mafia and the lies of politics behind to start a clean life together. Hyunjun had officially closed his dangerous business ties, turning his family's wealth toward building schools and clinics instead. The air in Jeju was sweet, smelling of the ocean and the green pine trees that covered the hills. They arrived at a beautiful house made of wood and glass that looked out over the sparkling blue water. There were no armed guards in the corners, only the sound of the wind and the peace they had fought so hard to find. As they walked along the beach, Malaya realized that the debt of blood was finally paid. They were no longer running from the past. They were walking toward a bright future. The quiet of the Jeju house was broken by a sharp, high cry that signaled a new beginning. Isaiah Minho Han was born into a world of love, far away from the violence of his father's past. Hyunjun sat on the edge of the bed, holding the small, perfect bundle in his large, tattooed hands. He didn't look like a feared boss anymore. He looked like a man who had finally found his heart. He touched the baby's tiny fingers, and a single tear of joy tracked down his cheek, disappearing into the dark ink of the scorpion on his neck. The scorpion was no longer a symbol of a killer. It was now a symbol of a father who would do anything to protect his son. Malia watched them both with a tired but beautiful smile, knowing she was finally loved for exactly who she was. Their new legacy was not built on fear or ambition, but on the rhythm of 3 hearts beating together in perfect peace. Sometimes the person who looks like a monster is the one building you a nursery, and the one who looks like a prince is the one planning your destruction. Never judge a heart by its ink.
So perfect.
Judge it by its actions.
I love you both.
Malia didn't find safety in wealth or status. She found it in loyalty. Hyunjun didn't find redemption in power or fear. He found it in love. And little Isaiah Minho Han came into the world as living proof that what begins in pain can end in pure, unshakable peace. The lessons this story leaves behind are simple but powerful. A title means nothing. A promise means everything. The ones who stay in the storm, who shield you with their body, who build walls around your dreams before you even ask, those are the ones worth keeping. And you are never a mistake. You are never someone's liability. You are the prize. It always have been. If this story moved you, encouraged you, or reminded you of your own worth, hit that like button, drop a comment below telling us your favorite moment, and share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a story that hits different. Tell us, Team Hyunjun from the start, or did he have to earn it? Thanks for watching.